Welcome all. Back with Ruba in a study on fostering trust and employee well-being through reflective supervision and relational-based supervision. And today's the deeper dive.
Thank you so much, Leora. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning for some of you. Alaska, wow, I'm blown away. I'm super excited just to have such a multidisciplinary group of folks here. So just bear with me. I did want to do a recap of of Tuesday, sorry. So I want to make sure that people that weren't here have just a brief recap, but we will really be also sharing new and hopefully innovative and effective and supportive information. Again, I'm Ruba. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, specialized in infant mental health and a reflective practice mentor and a lifelong learner. I saw that somebody had put that in the chat as well. And what I call a racial justice community builder. I work really hard around decolonization and anti-racism work. So I'm super excited to delve deep into some of that in this reflective practice world that we're in together. I'm so excited to spend time with you and support you in this journey in reflective practice and facilitation. I invite you to have a notebook. I know we did this last time, but I do invite you to have a notebook so that you are able to jot down some notes. As you know, reflection is all about you have a time to reflect. And because we're only doing an hour and a half today, it's super important that you just have somewhere to write down your thoughts or feelings, things that may challenge you or things that stand out to you so that you're able to look back on them. And maybe even review them later with your own supervisor or with your supervisee as you see fit. So for those of you who were here with me on Tuesday, welcome back. And for those who are just joining for the first time, welcome. Super excited to have you here. I know there were a few questions that came up around trust on Tuesday, and I will try my best to weave that into our topic today. I think one thing to really think about is how much time you have invested in really building the trust with your team and your supervision. Trust has to be developed over time, as we know in all of our relationship work that we do, either as therapists, students, teachers. We really want to hold that trust. And, really also honoring that I don't know the full context of a situation, but these were some questions that I thought of that you might want to consider. Has the issue of trust been addressed? So has there been a focused time building trust with the team and or the supervisee or the group that you're working with that you're feeling that there's mistrust? Do you have support in your own leadership team to discuss these concerns and receive support? And then if team building activities have occurred, what was the outcome? And then are you yourself feeling mistrust within your own agency and organization? And those are really, I think, just some factors to think about when you're looking at, if there isn't, or if you're feeling like there is that mistrust within your relationship with your staff, or if it's coming kind of from a leadership perspective, which can be a little bit harder. But when we're aware of where it's coming from, right, it's easier for us to support our staff or to figure out how to rebuild the trust. So we'll just do our group agreements again. For those of you who are here on Tuesday, we will just do a brief recap of that. We'll go into our building blocks of reflective practice, self-awareness, the awareness of the other, which we touched on a little bit on Tuesday, reflective supervision framework, our dilemma that we'll go into and discuss together, limitations, and then diversity, equity, inclusion, and cultural considerations within reflective practice. Part of the work here, even through Zoom, and I really like to do this within my consultative work when I'm working in group settings, is really to talk about these 4 agreements for courageous conversations, which I just think are so relatable in every aspect in our work. And the first one is obviously being present and engaged. So thank you for being here. I think also just having a scrap sheet of paper or a notebook will also help you stay engaged. And then the second one is obviously allow yourself to experience discomfort. These agreements are for all of us. Many times we work together and we are around people that have different value systems, or we have different upbringings, and we may not believe or have the same values and beliefs. And so sometimes we have to sit through that discomfort. As you're aware, in this political environment that we're in now, there's probably a lot of discomfort. And so how do we really sit with that, become aware of where our discomfort is, and being able to really kind of just uh, hold ourselves kind of accountable in that, knowing where we sit in that. How do we regulate through that? And just really inviting you to hold that, especially when we're talking about race, class, privilege, those kinds of topics where we can really have a lot of discomfort, and that's okay, that we're not always going to agree. And in that supervisory relationship, that isn't really the point. The point isn't for us to necessarily agree or to do things the same way, but it's really to hold the space of, how do I support my staff? If we don't agree, how do we really work together to still have maybe the mutual agreement on the language and how we want to kind of move forward together, even though we might not see eye to eye on something. And of course, there are limitations to that, right? If it's something that goes against policies or your program in particular, I think that's different. But in the larger scheme of how do we support our staff if we don't agree on a values-based situation, like if we want to talk about family planning with our families, right? I know that one's a hot topic because sometimes somebody doesn't feel that they don't necessarily believe in family planning or having options, right? Maybe even just being on birth control pills or going to have an abortion. And what does that mean, right? That I can still hold those personal values, but I have to also meet the client where they're at and really support the client in what they need. And so really being able to support our staff in that and having the space for them to feel the trust, to be vulnerable, that we can feel the discomfort, right? I might not agree with that. I'm not saying I don't, but it's just an example. And so how do we really hold our own value system, understand where our values sit within us so that we're able to support the staff in helping the families decide what's best for them or the student or the whoever you're working with. And then third, of course, falls into discomfort is speaking your truth. That's super important. Being a woman of an immigrant family coming here, not knowing the language. I think that one is like one of those passionate things for me. It's like, how do I really speak my truth? What is my truth? And how do I help others speak their truth? And then sometimes, we can lose then the client's truth. Like where does that sit, and kind of having that perspective of the other. But really in this space, really allowing yourself to really think about like, where do I really sit with this, what we're discussing or where we're going in this topic, and really holding on to that and seeing how it impacts you so that you're aware of how to support your staff. And then fourth, of course, is expecting and accepting non-closure. I think many of us feel this, especially right now, that we don't have closure around certain decisions or things that are happening in our world, right? And how do we kind of sit with that and also be in community around that, right? That we can really be in a space of, gosh, I can't with this right now. Like, this is just too much for me. I can't really resolve it, right? But we can be kind of, are there ways that we can support each other through it because we know it's affecting us? Maybe we're affected in the same way, maybe in different ways, but kind of holding that space for that. In particular with topics of race, class, privilege, and power, these are definitely hot topics for that and really can push the envelope on whether we can get closure or not. There we go. And then I'll just read this quote again that I love from Christy Brandt as one of the more wholesome reflective practice definitions that I've encountered. Quality reflective facilitation activities include strategies that support participants in having access to the limbic system, the neocortex, and our body sensations. So really thinking about, what I said earlier, that how does this sit in my body? How is this making me feel? Am I uncomfortable? Am I dysregulated? Is this making me anxious? Is it making me nauseous? Is it making me not want to be in this room with this person, right? All of those are really important things that we need to be mindful of and really listen to our bodies. So that kind of somatic experience. And then how does that support us in gaining the insight to explore our reactions and responses, examine thoughts and feelings, and then imagine, plan, and integrate the knowledge and the theories. And then we have what we call the spheres of reflection. So reflective functioning, I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker than Tuesday. There are 3 spheres. The reflective functioning is at the core, and it's that capacity we have as human beings to be able to have thoughtfulness regarding our own internal states and the internal states of the other. Again, I shared like the car rage example, that kind of when we are reactive, right? We have that moment of just not being able to tap into our reflective functioning, and that's common and quite normal. And many times we want to think about reflective supervision and reflective functioning as a muscle. So the more you use it, the more you'll be able to access it with more ease. And then also paying attention to the fact that sometimes we'll find that we're not able to have that reflective functioning capacity due to being under threat or danger, feeling like we're not in a space of safety, and that can happen. And it's really being able to just be aware of that, or working with others in a reflective supervision space, that sometimes we'll find too that our supervisee, it's a little bit harder to really to tap into that reflective piece. But the more we integrate it in and talk about it and think reflectively with them about how challenging it is or what's coming up for them or getting in the way, that we'll be able to eventually tap in. It might just take a little bit more time. And we also see this with clients as well, I think, in that same parallel process. And then we have reflective practice, which is a way of deliberately paying attention to internal and interpersonal experiences to expand the awareness of multiple influences and multiple meanings. And it'll deepen our understanding and expand our possibilities. Really kind of what we're here to do today, and which really leads us into reflective supervision and how we really want to be able to support others, right, in their professional growth, and more so really thinking about the vulnerabilities, and then looking at the limitations, which we'll get into more today, around race, class, power, and privilege. Okay, and these are our building blocks of reflective supervision. The awareness of one's strengths, as well as one's limits and vulnerabilities, allows individuals to make mid-course corrections in work performance that feel natural, unforced, and generated from within. So at the core of this framework is the reflection piece, right? And how do we support others to be able to do this with us as well? And a reflective supervision relationship I had with a supervisee. I think I alluded to this example a little bit, but I'll go into more depth here today. I had a staff member who was African-American, and she was older than myself and had been at my place of work for a lot longer. And certain dynamics entered the room, and, or should I say, into the relationship, right? It was up to me to bring those forward. So as the supervisor, even though I may have felt discomfort, or maybe I felt a little bit of a lack of confidence, or really looking at kind of the dynamic between us that I was noticing, I had to really pause and just think about, okay, what's happening here? And what's going on for me? What's going on for them? And can I also check in with somebody else about it, right? That kind of not knowing where I'm sitting with somebody and not really knowing if it's about me or them. But more importantly, it's how do we bring it to the room and really kind of talk about it, right? So I'm obviously white passing, but I'm also an immigrant. And we'll go into more about our social locations in a little bit. But I had to really think about also, how do I bring that forward into my work with this person? Because it was coming up, right? So in reflecting on myself and what I bring, I also had to share with her the pieces around not just who I am and how I identify, but also acknowledging the fact that I'm her supervisor. I'm in a position of power. I do her evaluation, and we, sometimes at certain periods of time that can allow for a promotion, like a financial increase. And so that's a huge position of power, regardless of, what my race or ethnicity is. As a supervisor, I hold a position of power. And then of course that's, it will depend on your agency, but for the most part, the supervisor has definitely some aspects of a power relationship over the supervisee. And so I think with being able to be honest with her directly about, hey, how's it going? Like, I know we just started working together. I know that you've also been here longer. Just really acknowledging certain things. Like, what's it like for you to work with me? Like, I'm new to the whole department. I just got here. What are your thoughts? Like, I just kind of really opened it up because I was also curious and I wanted to know if it was impacting her or not. And of course, there's always that like, are they really going to be honest right off the bat? But I think it's so important to give permission for us to talk about the nuances of, the fact that I am white passing, I'm a woman, I have, I live in a certain area, I have kids, all of those things really impact. And it's really up to us to really hold that accountability of sharing that and giving permission for that to come into the space. And then we have collaboration, which is a space to also think about when we don't want to do something, but it's part of the program. Similarly, like in collaborating together and thinking about like someone who doesn't want to do maybe assessments because they don't like them or they don't like to categorize somebody within a specific mental health diagnosis or anything that might be hard for people where they're just kind of like, it's like, how do we come together to say, you know what, this is part of our protocol. Like, you have to do this. Like, how do I support you so that we can do this together? I know it's really hard. Do you want to role play? Should I, help you? Do you want me to attend a session with you? Do you want me to be on the phone with you just to walk you through it? Do you want to watch me do it first? Like all of those things. It's like, how do we really still hold the piece that this is something we do have to do, but we're going to do it together and it's collaborative, right? And also holding a space of giving your supervisee the opportunity to share their knowledge and their expertise with you is super important. And also giving them a space to share, well, what do you think, is going on for the parent and how would you like to proceed? Like, what are your thoughts on what you'd like to do next? And then we already touched a little bit on this, but in honoring just the slide and this piece here from the 0 to 3 website, trusting relationship, right? In order to really feel that you can reflect or support someone in looking at their work, there needs to be trust and thorough regularity and collaboration comes first, right? So having that consistent supervision and then the collaboration, right? But the trust really is that kind of base for the work, being authentic and giving the supervisee time to build their relationship with you as they are building their trust with the families that they serve and really holding kind of that parallel process. And working to have a mutual understanding in the supervision will also deepen the trust that you feel in the relationship that you have with whom you're working with. And then, yeah, I think that's it for that one. Go into social location next. All right, so I know we talked a little bit about this on Tuesday, self-awareness and the awareness of the other. When you're working with others, what are your thoughts, your feelings, your judgments? How have you been supervised? What did you like or not like, right? What was helpful or not helpful? Like who do you identify as? It's important to look at and invite an individual's, what we call the social location, into the room, right? And that's a combination of things. It's the categories, factors, or attributes such as gender, race, age, ability, immigration, status, language, sexual orientation, employment, and religion. And we'll have an opportunity with the dilemma to kind of share examples of what you think that looks like. And then also looking at how does your staff identify, right? I think it's so important to ask them. I think sometimes I even hear from staff, like, I'll ask them, I'm like, well, did you ask the parent how they pronounce their name? Or like, did you ask them about their religion or their immigration story or their migration story or what happened to them? And many times I hear like, no, I hadn't thought of doing that. Or even just that question of like, how did you come up or where does your name come from, right? If you're not working with a parent with a baby, because we like to ask, how did you come up with that name for your baby? You can also ask, what does your name mean? I mean, there's so much around this that can be done also in the supervision. It doesn't have to just be with the clients, but this is a way that we can really kind of use a lot of these strategies and reflective strategies to kind of support in your relationship with your staff. And what does that mean to you, right? Like if they are sharing certain things that you're just like, I don't know if any of you know that about your staff. Like how many of you have asked your staff about, maybe put a one in the chat if you've asked your staff about their their cultural or ethnic identity. Thanks, Leora. Oh, there we go. We got a bunch of ones. We got a bunch of ones. And then how many of you have shared your own cultural or ethnic identity with yours, like have actually talked about it with your staff? Can you put a 2 in the chat? Yeah, I mean, that's great. 2-ish. Oh, what does a 2-ish mean? Kind of shared, kind of didn't share. Okay. Okay. I wonder why. Yeah. Yeah. I think also just thinking about the fact that I worry that it may be uncomfortable to some folks to share these details. I share my identity and hope to prompt them to share theirs. Yeah, yeah. And I wonder, I would invite you to think about what's uncomfortable for you and like where does that come from? Because that might be more about what you're holding on to and not necessarily the staff. And at the same time, it might be really real concerns or fears or discomfort because of things that have happened where you work, right? Like we want to be mindful of all of that. And are there people that you can go to, colleagues or your own supervisor, that you can really kind of hash some of that stuff out? Because the more we also mask or protect, right, we might notice that our staff does the same with us, right? That there isn't that kind of be that whole authentic self. And I'm not saying like to share your full life story with people, just the same as like we wouldn't say supervision is the same as therapy, right? It's the same thing. It's like there's these boundaries and we want to just hold the space to really be real so that it invites the realness back from the person that you're sitting with. Yeah. So even if there's triggers that may be revisited, there's the way we can always ask, right? Is that okay to talk about? Is that something you want to share? You don't have to share if you don't want to. I think sometimes it's more when we just don't, it's that speaking the unspeakable. I don't know if you guys have heard that term before, but really when we give permission for people to talk about something, right? That we hold it and we contain it through the supervision, which is supposed to be containing, that we hold it so that it feels like there isn't a suspicious or a way of I'm doing this, I want you to share this because it's I'm doing this because I want the because is more about I want to get to know you so I understand you better, but not because I need it for an informative piece for your evaluate, those kinds of things. And there's always that checking in with your staff about how things are going, or if you're talking about certain things to kind of check in with them about it. Yeah, this is great. Thank you for sharing. I love when people are able to share. Let's see, I'm moving. It's move over slide. Get it to move. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so thank you. Leora actually shared this slide with me and I absolutely love it. So I think just to share that when we're working with staff or students, you know, uh, we're asking them to be vulnerable. We really need to hold ourselves accountable to that and to hold the respect and value of who the other person is and what they bring to our table and how much we also learn from our supervisees or who we're working with, who's in the room with us, right? So how do we really hold others when we are not looking at or acknowledging who people are, how they identify, and in what space of power and privilege or more marginalized space that they live in, right? I think part of this for me, I'm super passionate about this part because I felt for a time when I was being supervised that this wasn't something that was invited in. It was kind of brushed upon, or I'd hear pretty inappropriate things said to me in the supervision, to the point where I had to ask for a different supervisor, right? And I think that that really plays a huge role, and it also impacts the way that I was able to support other families and how I also kind of had to avoid these kinds of topics because I wasn't receiving the support I needed to kind of be able to talk about these things. So for instance, I want you to just kind of, the two visuals here reflect a number of ways power and privilege show up in our society based on everything from race to wealth to physical ability and access, right? So I encourage you to look at the image on the right and post in the chat how you identify. Okay. So for instance, I identify as a Palestinian immigrant who is white passing and who holds a privileged position of power in my work, both as a supervisor and a therapist, as well as a cisgender solo mother of two. That's super long. And I think I forgot my spirituality piece in there. So as much as you can share, I'd love for you to share how you identify in the chat. I'll give people a minute. You don't have to answer every aspect of it. I know it's a lot. Working class. Yeah. And I invite you to think about more about how we want to acknowledge people's identities. So even though we might want to avoid labels, right? We still hold on to that piece for you is like, I want to avoid utilizing labels. I could never find my label, right? So I did the census and then I stopped doing it because they never had my ethnicity there, right? But I still very much aligned with the fact that I was Palestinian, right? And so even though I might not utilize a label, the person you're with might, right? So we want to we still want to invite people in to share who they are. And then if we have a blanketed, and this might be controversial, so you guys can bleep this part out, Leora, but if we don't acknowledge any identity, right, we're minimizing who someone may be without actually doing it on purpose, right? So I think we want to be mindful of how do we invite people in and be authentic and real and still allow for people to be able to, whether they have a label or not, or however they want to identify, that they can share that.
Ruba, can I chime in quickly?
Yes, please. There's so much in the chat right now, so we can't even keep up. Thank you so much, you guys, for participating.
So I want to just quickly, I want to just invite us that part of the purpose, the so that of what we're doing here is to not only be in reflection with the accesses to power that we hold, but the stories of power that might be invisible or visible in the room, and that these labels are dynamic, meaning you could be something now, but growing up could have been something very different. And all of the stories of our lives influence the way that we see ourselves and each other, right? So some of us might have might own property now, but we might have been home insecure when we were children. And that might impact the way and why we care so much about children who are home insecure. And maybe I'm in relationship with a colleague and I'm having conflict with them because they keep saying those homeless kids. And we don't understand why that conflict is coming up, but I might have had a childhood experience that connects to that. And so Ruba, I think the challenges, because I'm imagining I know some of the people in the room, that not
Yeah,
all workplaces are the space to share all of our things, right? That's not
right,
always the right way. But
right.
the discernment and reflection for ourselves is how all the stories we carry are showing up with how we're seeing our colleagues and the people we're supervising and ourselves in it. How does that land, Rupa?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's no right way, obviously. You have to do what feels best for you. But we want to really be mindful of how whatever we share or don't share or hold back without inviting, right? It's more about the invitation in. And we want people to feel like they feel safe. And most of the time, people feel safer when we share our vulnerability too. So, kind of holding that in mind with however you want to present this and do the work with your staff, because it really opens it up, right? I had another African American staff I was working with, and she comes in and she's just like, I went to high school with my client. And I thought, oh, okay. I go, well, what was that like for you? And she's like, it was fine. It was fine. And she was just very like, it was fine. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, tell me about what you remember about her. How did this come up? And so we went into, she ended up telling me all her history about what high school she went to, that she almost dated someone that person was connected to. I mean, this is a person she's going to have to work with like weekly in home visiting, who's going to support her with her baby's development, right? And the staff wanted to kind of brush it off, and I just felt the need to at least acknowledge it, see how she was feeling about it. But she always felt the need to not go very deep into it. But I acknowledged it. And then we had more opportunities to bring it up. She brought it up more later. But just being mindful of when you're afraid to bring something up, is thinking about that and holding on to that and writing it down. I don't know if I want to talk about this. This is going to ruffle some feathers, right? There's a reason why that's coming up. And I invite you to just really connect to that. I know someone had their hand up, and I'm hoping we can get them with the Q&A, if that's okay. Is that okay, Leora? Yeah. Okay, so please write down your point or question, and we will hopefully have time for Q&A. Thank you all so much for sharing. I love the way you identified and that you participated in this activity. Yes, it is important to acknowledge that some privilege holds higher power than others, right? And your experience of that might be totally different depending on where you grew up, where you live now, your current state, like Alaska might be very different from Guam, and here in California. I mean, all of those are so different, but we want to be aware of how it impacted us and where we see our power and privilege. Thank you all so much for participating. Okay. Oh, sorry, that went too fast. Thank you. So here we have our reflective supervision dilemma. I'm going to try to read this, and then we're going to have Mentimeter questions for you to answer with this dilemma. So the supervisor is Michelle. She's Caucasian. She's a program manager and has been a supervisor for 4 years. She hired Erica, who is the home visitor. Erica is African American and is her first year working in the program. And this is the family that she went to see. Gabby is the mother. She's Latina. She's a solo parent. She has 2 kids under 5, and visits have not been consistent. Mom responds to texts and meets with the home visitor. She meets with the home visitor. They have been working together for about 9 months, and the last 2 months have been more inconsistent. Mom will complete the assessments, but doesn't share much information when Erica asks her clarifying questions. So it's really like a quick visit. It can go sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes. It's very brief, but there's still a connection that's happening. In the past, Gabby, the mom, has called the supervisor to request more gift cards. This program gives out gift cards on a need basis. Erica has already given mom 2 approved cards and no others were approved at this time, right? So the context is during the home visit, after Erica arrived, the home visitor, the caregiver, the grandmother, let Erica in. Mom did not come out to the living room. Erica could hear mom in the other room on the phone. After waiting for about 10 minutes, Erica left the home visit. So the mom never came out of the room. Erica was just sitting there and the kids were there and the grandmother was in the kitchen. So in supervision, Michelle, the supervisor, asks Erica about her week and how visits with families have been going. Erica says, "Oh man, do I have a doozy for you. I had a visit that was confirmed with Gabby, and you won't believe what happened. Her mom let me in, but Gabby never came out of the room. I could hear her on the phone in the other room. I waited for about 10 minutes and left. What do you want me to do? Continue to work with her?" And so I invite you to think about this dilemma, hold on to the pieces around the social location. Okay, challenges to consider, more challenges to consider. We can go over these like over and over and over. But time, right? So when we're thinking about reflective supervision, consultation, whether you're doing this in a group format, individual, and this might be something that is quite basic, but I just wanted to go over it, is, what does your schedule look like? Who controls your schedule, right? Where can this be set up consistently, right? 1 time a week, 2 times a month, virtually or in person with your supervisee, right? Like, how are you actually meeting consistently enough to talk about cases, to talk about families, to talk about the services that they're providing, to talk about how things are going, right? One of the things that we brought up a little bit on Tuesday was administrative versus, right, reflective supervision. And we want to be mindful of what that looks like, right? And it just depends on the needs, because sometimes some programs can really push a harder priority of addressing administrative needs. And so the reflective work that you'll be doing might feel more challenging. So I invite you, if you don't have, a group of colleagues or someone that you can go to as the supervisor or manager or the consultant, to have a group that you're able to talk about implementing or bringing in more of this reflective practice work, because you're going to need that support. How does the leadership or administration support you in providing and or receiving reflective supervision or consultation? And what can you do to advocate for this? So if you're really wanting to implement more reflective practice in your agency or your work or wherever you are, what can you do to support that? And then what kind of supports will you need to kind of make that happen, right? So if you don't have support for your program either, like if you're the only supervisor, it's going to be harder to do that. And so finding trainings like this or being able to advocate for an outside consultant to come in to support you can be really, really just pivotal in this work and supporting you to continue to be able to tap into the reflective work. And then of course, consistency, building trust, really, it's all about being consistent. Because, if you're just kind of like canceling your supervisions like all the time or rearranging them all the time, that's kind of a no-no. We really don't want people to do that, because what does it do for the worker, for the student, for whoever you're working with? Like, what does that feel like? Like if you're trying to meet with me and I just keep like rescheduling you and keep moving it around, right? There's this kind of a underlay of, you're not a priority. I don't value our time. And I get it. Like, we all have demands and things that we need to get done, but it's really, if you can find one point in time every 2 weeks or once a month, even though once a month is very infrequent for supervision. Really being able to support your staff. But if you have a consistent time, it also helps them with their schedule. If they're seeing a lot of different people or they're working in different settings or whatever, them knowing that every other Tuesday I see Ruba at 11 o'clock. My program demands that we have, it's part of that model, but the model of the program I work for, they require weekly reflective supervision. So I meet with my staff every single week at the same, I can tell you each day which one I'm meeting with. And it's just part of the program. And I'm just like, oh, I get to speak to so-and-so today. So every Tuesday, I see so-and-so. Every Thursday, I see so-and-so. And every Monday, that kind of thing. So just even for me, it's helpful because I know what to expect. But if you don't have control over your schedule, I can see where that can be really challenging. Yeah. Yeah, weekly is kind of the typical, and it kind of makes sense for staff. I think sometimes we negate how much they need it, but they do need it. And working with people when so much is going on in the world too, like how do we also prevent that burnout, especially if you're going through stuff, like all of that plays into it. We've already addressed a lot of this, but just to recap, right? How are we looking at these, right? Race, ethnicity, gender, religious bias, power and privilege, administrative versus reflective, right? I just wanted to have a moment to really kind of just have a slide for that, because even though we've talked about it, we sometimes might still not really want to address it or bring it up. I know for us, because the staff, a lot of my staff in the past also have always worked with families in general, these topics tend to just kind of come up anyway, especially around religious bias. Also, if you're doing the work in a different language, right? One of the social locations had language on there. I speak a few different languages, and sometimes the bias comes from the language, right? Like somebody can say something and they can refer to a certain group within their language, and it comes off a little bit biased, right? So we want to just be understanding of that and kind of think together about that. We want to be able to support families in the languages that they prefer. And then also, if you can, which I think is really neat and awesome, and I had the privilege of having this as well, is if you're able to provide that supervision. So if your staff are Spanish speaking, for instance, and you speak Spanish, it's really neat to also offer that service to your staff and provide the supervision in a different language as well. Do any of you do that? You can put it in the chat if you do, because I think that that's really great, but also really complex work. Oh, sí, okay, muy bien. Yes, awesome. Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, there's some programs that will also use the language line. I know not necessarily maybe for therapy per se, but if we cannot find them the services that they need in their primary language, right, and they're not able to do it in English, we will use a language line sometimes, which is kind of our last form of resort. But we want to be able to provide the service, right, because the language is super important and such a we need to be able to give that access point. And then this is just as we're kind of coming to an end here, and we'll hopefully have some time for some questions, is where to begin, right? So we really want you to feel like, right? So getting to know, building trust, getting to know your supervisor, your consultant, right, is really asking specific questions. I really like to start a new supervisory relationship, or if I receive a request for consultation or for a training, I'd like to get an assessment. Like I want to find out, what's the intention, what's your vision, and why am I here? Like why now, right? So with supervision, we want to understand what was their experience in the past with supervision. Have they had reflective supervision in the past? That's a great, if you provide that as a program, that's a great interview question, is to ask, have you had reflective supervision in the past? Or what would that look like to you? And if they don't know, then you have a sense of just kind of where they're at with it. But we want to really understand people's experiences and what was helpful, what wasn't helpful, what style of learning worked better for them. because this really helps us to get that information. So we're able to meet them kind of where they are and still hold in mind that we're doing a training or we're teaching about the administrative pieces of the program. But then we also understand kind of where we are at with their supervision experience. Okay. So that also falls into what I call the assessment part of the supervision. And then expectations, right? We want to be clear about those expectations. This really brings in that power and privilege piece, right? I know I'm going to have to do an evaluation in 6 months. We'll go over it together. This is kind of how we do it in the agency or whatever it is. But we want to be able to look at the expectations on both ends, right? What would you like for our supervision to look like? I know last time on Tuesday, we talked a little bit about how do you kind of check in about how is the reflective supervision going, right? And this kind of talks about that. So we're going to do the ongoing check-in. You can do just so that it's in your calendar. You can put it in at 6 months, every 6 months, just to check in, like have a quick check-in about how's it going? How's the supervision going for you? What's been helpful, what's not been helpful, right? And then we also want to do what we call co-creation, mutual understanding. We want to be able to feel like with our staff that we have a mutual respect for each other. We understand where each other's coming from. And we really want to hold the space to co-create the strategies together so that we're able to support each other and not just assume that we need to provide the feedback in a certain way. And then sharing about reflective supervision. So if people are new for you in your agency, is helping them to understand what it is, right? And what it looks like, what my role is as a reflective supervisor, and what I hope I'm providing for you. And that I would hope you would let me know if it wasn't what you were needing, right? I think that's also a big piece around the authenticity of how we are with our staff and what we're sharing with them about our vulnerabilities, that we make mistakes too, and how do we also acknowledge that in the relationship. Okay, and then we're going to go to the next one. Let's see if it'll work. Fingers crossed. There it is. Okay. Ongoing reflective supervision. So this is what I call the secret sauce. I know secret sauce can be thrown out in so many different contexts, but for me in this particular just field of work, the secret sauce is that you have ongoing reflective supervision and or consultation, right? That the supervisor really needs that. I don't know how many times I've been in a situation where I've had to supervise people and I haven't had that level of support. And it's really, really hard because you feel so alone. You don't feel like you're doing your best work, but just having that consultative group, whether it's with your own colleagues, whether it's with people that you've met here today on Zoom, but really being able to share and advocate for that you either have your own supervisor that's reflective, right? We can have a supervisor that's administrative all day long, and they never really get to the heart of what's going on between us and our staff or our team. And we really want people that really can support you in reflecting on what's coming up, because things will come up as we work with other people. That's kind of just a way of the way things work out, right, in our field. And as we know too, as I shared on Tuesday, that reflective practice, reflective supervision reduces burnout, and that's the same for the supervisor too. You want to be able to have that support for yourself and take care of yourself. And then I'll skip over the next one is the prompts, but I think they'll be in the slide deck for you when you get it in the email. That I'm wondering, I notice, I wonder how you feel about, and then we'll just skip through and then my contact information is there. It'll be in the slide deck, so just you can feel free to look at that later. And then our last little quote here, and want to give you guys some space for question and answer if you have any questions. And I know somebody did earlier, hopefully they're still here, but reflection is one of the most underused yet powerful tools for success. And so I just invite you to hold that in mind in the state of the world that we're in.
Thank
So if you're
you.
feeling any type of way, take some time, write it down and talk to somebody about it, because doing it alone isn't the way to go.
Amen to that. Thank you, Ruva. I have one question that came to me. So we do have time for Q&A, y'all. This is the beauty of this space. So you could either chat, you could private message me if you want anonymity, or you could raise your hand and ask a question. I just want to do the caveat that if you do that, you are consenting to being recorded in the recording. So 3 options: put a question in chat. Option 2, direct message me for confidentiality. Option 3, raise hand. I wanted to offer, Ruba, that one of the questions that came up in private chat, and actually it's something that you and I had talked about as we were talking about this series, is reflection in itself is a privilege, right? It means that we feel safe. It means that our limbic system is regulated, and then we're able to be in this prefrontal cortex reflection space. And I'm curious how your experience is when either a whole organization is going through crisis, a school site, one of the people in the relationship is going through a crisis. Like, how do we hold reflective supervision when reflection may not be accessible?
The first thought that comes to mind, and this is a really hard question to answer in like a few minutes, but I think holding compassion always, even though that can be really hard, because I think sometimes we get frustrated or we're feeling in a space of, why can't they see this, or why do we keep going over this over and over, where we've worked with people that just aren't able to access that reflective functioning as easily. And I think when we understand that in some states, like in our bodily state, it's just not going to happen. And we have to hold compassion for when people feel like either, even if we may think that they're in a safe space, right? Because there can be that assumption of like, everything is okay. You're here, you're not over there. Like that kind of, if we hold that empathy and compassion, so supporting either the supervisee to hold that empathy or compassion, but me, if I'm working directly with that person or family, it's really thinking about, it's not about that I have to make them reflect on it, right? It's holding the compassion that this is where they are. So we want to meet people where they are. And that can be really hard, especially if you really value reflection and you can just reflect all day long and be that reflective practitioner that we talked about on Tuesday. That it's not necessarily, that isn't the goal. The goal is the other pieces, which is to be collaborative, to have trust. So if we really hold the core of the work, that it's through the relationship. So if they trust you a little bit more, we're understanding more that they're in shock or their trauma or whatever it is that they're experiencing. So it's questioning like what's going on for them, like what's happening right now. It's not really about the reflective piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
That was
it makes
helpful.
me, so someone actually just private chatted me a follow-up, so I'm gonna hold that. I see you. It makes me think of your slide around, and I can't tell you which one, it was just at the end around timing too, that it also allows us, when we're in relationship with someone, right? If you, for example, if you're in a state of grief, acute grief, being in reflective supervision may or may not be the modality to be in. It actually might be really supportive for you to be in the like very concrete technical.
Yeah.
For those of you who were part of our Getting Grief Ready in the workplace as managers space, this is really connected to our work in March. And I'm thinking about, Ruba, is your invitation for all of us to be in conversation with the people that we're in relationship with, so that they have agency and choice. They can say, I'm in an acute grief space. Reflective supervision isn't the right move for me right now, but I'll tell you when it is, So there's consent there. The
Yeah.
follow-up question that came in was actually about neurodiverse team members. And sorry, actually, that's an error. That's an error. The question was about someone who has cognitive disability, which isn't always the same thing as neurodiversity. So I'm putting myself on blast out there. So I'm curious, when we're working with people that might have cognitive differences in their access, where does reflection live in the supervision relationship?
Yeah, I think that one definitely can feel sometimes more challenging in the moment. Like you're getting to know someone and you're asking them about specific things, and it might come through a behavioral, like they're not getting something done, their documentation, like something comes off as like a challenge where I can see it, my perception is, oh, they just can't get this paperwork done, or something, they're being challenged about this. Like that's my first kind of like, is that, where's your first kind of reflection on what's happening for someone? And then how do we actually tap into what it really is? And then there's also the piece that I want to just name for some people in different agencies where you can't actually ask somebody specifically like,
A
hey,
thousand
do you
percent.
have a
Yeah.
so you're put in this really weird as a manager or supervisor, you can be put in these really weird, difficult constraints, right? So we have to hold all of that stuff in mind. But I think if we are constantly coming back to that place of compassion and kind of understanding, and maybe it's through a strategy at first, like, oh, okay, it sounds like um or I had to check on paperwork or something like that, and I found out that they were having a difficult time because they didn't tell me yet, right? And I have no idea that there's a possible cognitive, like an issue around cognition at all. It's that sometimes it's more like there's these little signs that I'm seeing something, and I have to tease out like, oh, is this really a sign, or am I just perceiving it because I'm mad, like something irritated me about them? I mean, all of that plays into it too, is that dynamic in the relationship. But if there's more clear cut signs around like the documentation, or more um that kind of reflective function, like the some of the reflective questions, they're not coming out in the same kind of like, oh, well, they go more to maybe direct things, or the concrete concepts, right? Like they want to just know, they're like, just tell me what to do,
Yeah.
right? And as we built this relationship, if that's kind of their way, I'm going to have to possibly, like, we're going to have to come to an agreement around that, right? Like that there's this kind of space of coming together and helping them get there if they can, because I want their strategies to be their own. However, if they're like, I can't figure this out, right? Like I need, it's, I'm more aware that that's a challenge for them. And I might not hold it as a cognitive, I might not label it as anything. It's more like this is just who
Where
I'm
they are in that
with.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're having a challenge with that. But I did have a particular intern that I worked with for a long time, and it turned out that they did have
Mm-hmm.
some, but they never specifically shared it. It came out in a different way, which was really like not in a good thing. But we just kept working on the fact that they couldn't figure out how to schedule things like with their clients. And it was one of those very like, I was like, oh my God, this is so hard, because we would like have to sit together on the computer, and I felt like I was micromanaging them, but they were like, this is what I can't do it if you don't sit with me and do it. So it can be many different things. It can take many different forms, but I think if you try to follow their lead, and if it's within the appropriateness of like, that I can do that and I can support you in that, then I think that that's, kind of the way that we have to move with that person or whatever their experience is.
Yeah, and I think the other piece in reflection, and I'm going to get to the two questions in the Q&A. The other piece that comes up for me is that no matter ability, disability, there's a continuum in reflective supervision.
Yeah,
So we might be having a really compressed day in our stress landscape.
right.
I may not be able to receive a question from you that is deeply critically reflective, potentially even psychoanalytical. I might just need you to ask me, Leora, what are you proud about in this moment? What makes you proud in your work? That's a this scale question, which can still be incredibly powerful versus like, what are your hunches about how you did the work that elicited pride for you? Right? There's a continuum in the way we can ask questions as supervisors that can meet
Right.
our colleagues where they are.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving into closing, but the two questions in the Q&A are that book recommendations, continued learning recommendations, additional training recommendations. And I will say on the event page, we did pull together a ton of priming resources for you. So I will check, I would welcome you to check those out. But particularly, there's someone in the Q&A who's naming like, my workplace isn't the place for reflective supervision. How do I access that from outside of the space? And I'm going to answer also some organizations, but please share yours.
Yeah, well, the books I know I sent a list and it's gonna go out with the email. Oh, look at you guys. You guys are awesome. They just put it in the chat. But I did send some of my core books of trainings that I've had. I couldn't find enough about race, power, and privilege yet, but I'm gonna keep looking. So I'm hoping to have more resources for people around that. And I think when you are not able, I think there's so many factors to that when you're not receiving that in your agency. I say kudos to you for being the N of one here. I think, welcome. And I think that that's very challenging, and that makes me feel really sad for you because that's just not fair. I think people really have to think about when we're doing this work, if we're working with others, we really need to hold in mind the other, and that's the core of reflection. Like that's just so telling on how maybe you feel unsupported. So I just want to say that out loud. um I don't know, I never want people to pay outside, right, for like to pay privately for their own reflective practice or supervision when their agency should really pay for it. So I would invite you to, I mean, you can message me and we could think together about how do you propose this to your agency by sharing with them the benefits and the cost benefits. The video I shared on Tuesday, yes, they will be they will be. I'm just seeing that's funny, Leora. They will be in the email for the post training. The books will be in there and they have the links and everything. And then also the podcast we listened to, Mary Claire Heffron, if you want to look her up. There are some other reflective practice trainings also through Southwest Human Development, I believe, and I think you have them on your site. In Oakland and the Bay Area, I'm very familiar with their trainings. They have a whole infant mental health training component that they do. It's a long series. I'm sure Leora has a bunch of stuff on the registration link. I saw all the links there for the kit as well. And yes, and we can talk to if you're looking for specifically to work one-on-one, or if you want your agency to receive. I do agency consultation and infrastructure. Haven't done that in a minute, but I did do that for quite a few different agencies in the past. And so I think the more you can access some of these trainings, I don't know if there's another series of this one, but depending on where you are, different agencies, first five, if you have a first five where you are locally, they will do quite a few different reflective practice supervisions as well.
Have a really beautiful rest of your afternoon or day and be well.